friends, welcome back to this channel, and today we'll be discussing about prostaglandins. So we'll discuss about 6 major points of prostaglandins. One is what are prostaglandins, second their biosynthesis, third the involved enzymes, that means the enzymes which are associated with the prostaglandin biosynthesis and functionality, fourth the impact of prostaglandins on our body, and fifth is NSAIDs. Okay, so let's start with this. What are prostaglandins? So prostaglandins are nothing but 20 carbon fatty acid chains with 5 carbon cyclic ring structure. So you can see here, this is a 20 carbon fatty acid chain which has a 5 carbon cyclic ring structure, and all these prostaglandins, they belong to a same group or same family, and their family name is icosanoids. Okay, and all these icosanoids, all these prostaglandins, they come from a specific precursor molecule that is called arachidonic acid, and this arachidonic acid is henceforth will call it as ACD. Okay, so arachidonic acid or ACD. Now these arachidonic acids are basically released from phospholipids, as I think you all know that phospholipids are generally present in plasma membrane. So we'll now discuss about the biosynthesis, and you can see that yes, upon stimulation by hormone, ACD is released from phospholipid, means this arachidonic acid. So this is the plasma membrane, and when there is a stimulation by some hormone, then these arachidonic acids are being released from this phospholipids. So this is the arachidonic acid. As you can see, the structure of arachidonic acid is very similar to that of the prostaglandin. I have already shown you the structure of prostaglandin. This is the structure of prostaglandin, and this is the structure of arachidonic acid. So this is the precursor molecule, this ACD or arachidonic acid, and from this structure, basically this structure is modified and produced. Okay, so this arachidonic acid, it can undergo modification by two different enzymes. One is lipoxygenase, another one is cyclooxygenase. If the the enzyme which is associated with the modification is lipoxygenase, then from this arachidonic acid leukotrienes are produced, and these leukotrienes are associated with inflammation and as well as bronchoconstriction, vasoconstriction, and capillary permeability. So yes, so these leukotrienes are associated with inflammation, bronchoconstriction, vasoconstriction, and capillary permeability. Okay, next we have this cyclooxygenase. So if lipoxygenase is the enzyme, it will produce leukotrienes, and these are its functions. Then if the modification enzyme is cyclooxygenase, if arachidonic acid is modified by cyclooxygenase, it can produce prostaglandin. So the first produced prostaglandin is PGG2. This prostaglandin, this first P and G, this is for prostaglandin, and this is the subtype G2. So from this prostaglandin G2 or PGG2, first it will produce PGH2, prostaglandin H2, and from this prostaglandin H2, 4 different types of prostaglandins will be produced. First one is PGI2, second one is PGE2, third one is PGF2 alpha, and last one is TXA2 or thromboxane A2. Here we have to remember that there are other types of prostaglandins also present in our body, but we have confined our discussion to these 4 different types of prostaglandin because they are most important, and they play a major role in our normal maintenance of our normal homeostasis. So first, the PGI2. This PGI2 is associated with antiplatelet aggregation and vasodilation. So we all know that platelet is associated with the blood coagulation or blood clotting. Okay, so this is antiplatelet aggregation. That means this is not associated with the blood coagulation. It actually inhibits the blood coagulation, and also vasodilation is associated with the inhibition of blood coagulation. So PGI2 is associated with vasodilation, and it takes care of the fact that blood shouldn't be coagulated inside our blood vessel. Okay, blood should be coagulated whenever the body needs, whenever we have an injury or so. Otherwise blood should be fluid and it shouldn't be clotted. So that part PGI2 takes care of. Next we have PGE2, that is associated with again vasodilation and smooth muscle relaxation. Next we have PGF2 alpha, which is associated with smooth muscle contraction and vasoconstriction. See, the functionalities of this PGI2 and PGE2 is quite similar. Vasodilation, both are associated with vasodilation, but this PGF2 alpha, that is associated with vasoconstriction and smooth muscle contraction. So different types of PGs, that is the different types of prostaglandins, are associated with different types of functions. Okay, so there may be some complementary functions, there may be some opposite functions. So these are like vasodilation, these PGI2 and PGE2, they have like complementary functions. That means we can say that both of them, they are associated with similar function, but PGF2 alpha, that is associated with completely opposite function, that is vasoconstriction. Similarly, thromboxane A2, that is associated with platelet aggregation. So we have just discussed that PGI2 is associated with antiplatelet aggregation, so it will inhibit the blood coagulation. But this thromboxane A2, this is associated with platelet aggregation and vasoconstriction. So this thromboxane A2 is the main prostaglandin which is associated with blood coagulation, and for blood coagulation obviously we need vasoconstriction. In future, whenever we'll discuss about the blood coagulating factor and blood clotting process, we'll also discuss about this thromboxane A2. So these are the main types of prostaglandin, and this is the biosynthetic pathway. Okay, here I have to mention one thing, that this leukotrienes, which is also associated with bronchoconstriction and vasoconstriction, and this PG2 alpha, which is associated with smooth muscle contraction and vasoconstriction, this PGF2 alpha and leukotriene, these two are mainly responsible for all the asthma symptoms. Whenever we feel we have trouble breathing, then we should be aware that in our body leukotrienes and PGF2 alpha has been raised. Okay, next we have already discussed about these two enzymes, lipooxygenase and cyclooxygenase. Let's just discuss a bit more about these involved enzymes. So we have COX. COX is the cyclooxygenase. Okay, so cyclooxygenase aka COX. So there are two different types of COX. One is COX1, another one is COX2. Okay, so if we see about the COX1 is associated with stomach, kidney and platelets. So platelets are associated with the blood coagulation, and stomach, kidney, we all know who they are. So stomach, kidney and platelets, from these three different parts of our body, COX1 is released, and they have a constitutive expression. That means every time COX1 is produced in our body, the production of this COX1 is not dependent on any kind of stress or any kind of stimulation. Every time in our body COX1 is stimulated. But this COX2, that is cytokine induced. That means there should be a specific condition for COX2 synthesis, that is cytokine should be more, and that is associated with inflammation. So I think all of us now know what COVID is and what COVID did to our body. What happened majorly is, due to COVID, there was an induced cytokine level in our body. Whoever was affected by COVID, so the cytokine level got increased, and as a result the inflammation caused. Okay, and that time also the COX2 was playing a major role in our body in both inflammation and this induced cytokine symptoms. That is also now known as cytokine storm. Okay, so these are the two things about COX or cyclooxygenase. So we should remember that COX1 is constitutively expressed, so this is already and always present in our body, and this COX2 is present whenever there is cytokine induction is present in our system. Okay, next we have lipooxygenase. I have already mentioned that if the enzyme is lipoxygenase, these lycotrienes will be produced, and that is associated with again inflammation and bronchoconstriction. And lipoxygenase, yes, it will produce the lycotrienes, and that is mainly associated with symptoms of asthma, because that is associated with bronchoconstriction, vasoconstriction, as well as inflammation. So these three things together, they are mainly associated with asthma type of condition. We should also remember one thing, that as I have already mentioned, that leukotrienes and PGF2 alpha, these two together are mainly associated when there is a case of chronic asthma. Okay. So now the next part that we'll discuss is how prostaglandin impact on our body. So we can see that there are all the major systems, they are associated and affected by the prostaglandins. So first is the immune system. So immune system, mainly pain and fever, this is associated with the prostaglandin. I mean, if there is pain, there will be inflammation, and all, as I have already mentioned in the previous part of different types of prostaglandin, that pain, fever, and associated inflammation is associated with prostaglandin. So prostaglandin, the level of prostaglandin get raised up whenever there is pain, and fever is generally caused due to the increased level of prostaglandin. As we all know that fever is not a disease, it's just a symptom of disease. Okay, so the main cause of the disease is high level of prostaglandin. Okay, then the respiratory system, obviously in the respiratory system there are some prostaglandin, they act as vasoconstrictor, and some prostaglandin that act as vasodilator. So I have already mentioned that like PGI2, PGE2, they act as vasodilator, and if they are acting as vasodilator, means what? They are increasing the pulmonary blood flow and they are relieving the asthma condition. Okay, but if PGs are acting as vasoconstrictor, like what? Leukotrienes and PGF2 alpha, they act as vasoconstriction and they enhance the asthma condition. Okay, so here we can see that both of them have like different functionalities, opposite functionalities. Okay, next we have the reproductive system. In reproductive system, for ovulation, for normal corpus luteum function, and for uterine contraction, these prostaglandins are very needed. If we have excess amount of PGE2 and PGI2, there may be some problem, and those problems are like immature labor, endometriosis, that means there is there is a problem while any woman is pregnant, there is a problem in childbearing, their childbearing ability is less. Dysmenorrhea, that's a problem in females. Dysmenorrhea means while there is menstrual cycle is going on, there is severe pain. Okay, and other gynecological disorders are also associated with this excess amount of PGE2 and PGI2. Okay, then we have the renal physiology. In renal physiology, so I have already mentioned that COX-1, that is cyclooxygenase 1, that is mainly produced from stomach, kidney, and platelets. So from kidney, basically we have the renal medulla, and from this renal medulla these prostaglandins are produced and they act as vasodilators. They act as vasodilators means they are associated with vasodilation, and so excess fluid and electrolytes excretion in urine is caused by this increased level of prostaglandins from kidney or renal medulla. In the digestive system, as we have already mentioned, that from stomach and intestine different prostaglandins are produced and they are associated with inhibition of gastric secretion. Also they increase the intestinal motility, and so we can say that these species from stomach and intestine, they are associated with good amount of metabolism and associated with maintenance of a good gut health, because they inhibit excess gastric secretion and they also enhance the intestinal motility. So that is associated with the good gut health and better metabolism. But there are also drugs which can inhibit the PGs from GI. Okay, and those drugs can obviously cause some disorders, and those disorders are generally ulcers. Why? Because if we take drugs which are associated with inhibition of these prostaglandins which are secreted from stomach and intestine, then there will be increased gastric secretion, because these PGs are associated with inhibition of gastric secretion. So if we intake drugs which inhibit these PGs, there will be more gastric secretion and less intestinal mobility, and that will ultimately cause the ulcer. So then our next system is circulatory system. Again, in case of circulatory system, we have some prostaglandins act as vasodilators, some act as vasoconstrictors, and some are associated with specifically for the fetus. Let me just okay. So for vasodilators like PGI2 or prostacyclins, they act as vasodilators, and that is associated with the inhibition of blood clotting. See, I have already mentioned that when our body doesn't need the coagulating factors, when our body is fine, we don't have any injuries, especially the internal parts of our body, if blood clots in our internal parts of our body, that is a huge problem. So this PGI2 or prostaglandins, they take care of the fact that blood shouldn't get clotted within the in our internal system. So they inhibit the blood clotting and they cause the vasodilation. But there are some other prostaglandins which are associated with vasoconstriction, like thromboxane A2. They promotes the blood coagulation. Okay, that is also needed whenever we have some injury and we have bleeding. That time we need this blood coagulation factor or blood clotting, so then thromboxane A2 works. So we can from here we can easily say that this the concentration of this prostacyclins and thromboxane A2 should be maintained properly, so that there is no problem in the internal homeostasis of our body, right? Now for the fetus condition, we have ductus arteriosus. Let me show you what is ductus arteriosus. Yes, so this part is the ductus arteriosus. Okay, so over here you can see this part is ductus arteriosus. So yes, ductus arteriosus is basically is a channel type of thing which connects the pulmonary artery to the aorta, and for the formation of this ductus arteriosus, prostaglandins are needed. But after birth, what happens is, whenever the child breathes normally, then this ductus arteriosus should be closed, and if even after birth this ductus arteriosus is not closed, then there are doctors generally inject some prostaglandins. Doctor generally injects some drugs which can inhibit the prostaglandin synthesis, so that in less amount of prostaglandin, the ductus arteriosus cannot go on with their functions. So their functional ability reduced with the reduced production of the prostaglandins, which is induced by some drugs. Okay, so that is the thing about circulatory system. And now let's move into this last part of our discussion, that is NSAIDs. The full form of NSAIDs is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Okay, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Now these NSAIDs, what they do is basically they inhibit the prostaglandin biosynthesis. Now as I have already mentioned that there are three enzymes which are associated with prostaglandin biosynthesis. One is the cyclooxygenase, and among cyclooxygenase there are two subgroups. One is COX-1, another one is COX-2, and the second enzyme is leukotriene. So there are some leukotriene inhibitors. Let's first discuss about this leukotriene inhibitors. So these leukotriene inhibitors, there are two types of leukotriene inhibitor. One which can inhibit the lipoxygenase, that is the enzyme, and second we have leukotriene receptors. Okay, and since leukotrienes are associated with the asthma condition, if there are drugs which can inhibit the leukotrienes, that is the leukotriene inhibitors which can inhibit the leukotrienes or lipoxygenase, that means that they may be associated with the asthma condition or asthma treatment. Okay, so betterment of asthma condition, we use these leukotriene inhibitors. Okay, next we have this COX-1 inhibitors. As I have already mentioned that COX-1 is the enzyme which is produced in a constitutive manner. Okay, and they are generally produced from where stomach, kidney and platelets. So there are drugs like aspirin and indomethacin. These are the COX-1 inhibitors, and they work on stomach and kidney, because stomach and kidney are the sites from where COX-1 is produced. So they can inhibit the production of COX-1 from stomach and kidneys. And what they can do is they can inhibit the PGI2 and PGE2 synthesis. So these are the prostaglandins which are produced from stomach and kidney. So they can also, these COX-1 inhibitors, they can also inhibit the PGI2 and PGE2. But they have their own side effects. What side effects? See, if the prostaglandins which are being produced from the stomach and kidney, what were their main functions? As we can recall from this impact on our body, if we just expand this digestive system, we can see that these prostaglandins from stomach and intestine, they inhibit the gastric secretion and enhance the intestinal ability. So if we take these COX-1 inhibitors, what it will do, they will increase the gastric secretion and they will reduce the intestinal mobility, right? As I have mentioned here, that drugs inhibiting PGs from GI, that will cause cancer. So if we take COX-1 inhibitors, they will obviously lead to ulcers and GI tract disorders, right? So hope that is clear to you, that the prostaglandins which are being produced from stomach and kidney, they are produced by the COX-1 enzyme. And from this COX-1 enzyme, what are the prostaglandins that are produced? That is PGI2 and PGE2. If we intake drugs, okay, first let's just focus that what are the main functions of PGI2 and PGE2. The main functions are to inhibit the gastric secretion and to enhance the intestinal mobility. But if we intake drugs that can inhibit both COX-1 and the production of PGE2 and PGI2, then what it can cause? It can cause ulcers and other GI tract disorders. Okay. So to reduce this kind of side effects, scientists and pharmaceutical companies, they produce drugs which are associated with COX-2 inhibitors, because as we have already mentioned that this COX-2 enzyme is associated with the formation of prostaglandins only when there is induced cytokine level. Okay, so whenever there is cytokine level is increased in our body, that time only this COX-2 will work and they will produce prostaglandins. And if we take this COX-2 inhibitors, then there will be no chance of being associated with ulcers, because they doesn't hamper the digestive system. Okay, so they are like celecoxib and rofecoxib. These are the examples of COX-2 inhibitors. They can inhibit the inflammation, obviously, because this COX-2 enzyme is only being produced when there is inflammation and cytokine level is high. That time only this COX-2 enzyme is produced. And if we take COX-2 inhibitors, that will obviously inhibit the inflammation. They can reduce the risk of gastric ulcer, I have already mentioned, but unfortunately they have more side effects. Like if we take long term, if we take this kind of COX-2 inhibitors for long term, like for minimum for 1 year, it can cause risk of myocardial infarction, thrombotic stroke, and okay, let me just zoom out a bit. Yeah, so these COX-2 inhibitors, they can also inhibit the ability of the vascular endothelium to produce PGI2, which is a vasodilator, but it doesn't inhibit the thromboxylative synthesis from the blood platelets. So what they are doing is they are inhibiting the vasodilating prostaglandins, but they are not inhibiting the vasoconstricting prostaglandin. So that means there will be vasoconstriction, there is the probability of random vasoconstriction inside our body, and that will lead to myocardial infarction and heart attack and stroke and all. Okay, so to deal with that, you may have noticed that aspirin is the drug which is generally prescribed whenever there is a case of there are patients of myocardial dysfunction, that is cardiac dysfunction or stroke. Aspirin is given to them as blood liquefier. Why? Because what they do is, this aspirin, they can inhibit the COX enzyme. Yes, see, aspirin inhibit a COX-1 isoenzyme which is associated with the thromboxane A2 synthesis. This thromboxane A2 is associated with the vasoconstriction and blood coagulation. So this aspirin can inhibit this thromboxane A2 synthesis. Okay, so yeah, this thromboxane A2 is associated with the blood clotting. Aspirin induced inhibition of thromboxane A2 lowers the risk of stroke and myocardial infarction. So that's why, since aspirin can inhibit the COX-1 isoenzyme which is associated with the thromboxane A2 synthesis, so aspirin can inhibit the thromboxane A2 synthesis, and thus it can lower down the risk of stroke and myocardial infarction. Okay, so that was it for NSAIDs. Or again, the full form of NSAID is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Okay, so this is it about the prostaglandin. So we have today discussed about 6 major points, five major points of regarding prostaglandin. We have discussed what are prostaglandins, how they are biosynthesized, what are the specific enzymes needed for their biosynthesis, how these prostaglandins are impacting our overall physiological system, and what are NSAIDs. Hope this content makes sense, and if you like this content, please make sure to like, share and subscribe. Thank you.